Mastery isn't built in months, it's built over decades, forged over time. Welcome to the AHT Podcast, a podcast that aims to have meaningful conversations that assist men in becoming more capable and more competent as protectors, husbands, fathers, and brothers. I'm your host, David Acosta Jr., and today I am joined by my good friend, my brother, my teacher, and my mentor, Tuan Harley Elmore. Tuan Harley has been training and teaching martial arts for 37 years now. He's one of only a handful of martial artists in the world to hold full instructor certifications under Guru Dan Inosanto across multiple disciplines, including a myriad of Filipino martial arts, Lee Jumfang Gung Fu, and Jeet Kune Do concepts. He was later promoted to the rank of Tuhan in Sakali, the premier blade system under the late Pamana Tuhan Christopher Sayak Sr., through that lineage and through work connected to Sayak Tactical Group, Tuan Harley has spent decades training individuals ranging from everyday students to law enforcement and many of America's most elite military special operations units. But beyond all of the titles and accolades and certifications, what makes Tuan Harley unique is the road that he took to get there, which is a lifelong pursuit of mastery. Tuan Harley, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks for having me on, David.
It's my pleasure, sir. So, Tuhan, just starting off, I'd like to start at the beginning, at the very beginning of your journey, because when people see someone who has spent nearly 4 decades in martial arts and having reached the levels that you have, they often hyper-focus on the finished product or the outcome and miss out on key components of the process itself from which the outcome derived. So with that in mind, if you can, sir, can you take us back to the beginning? How old were you when you first got into martial arts, when the martial arts first entered your life?
Well, that was a long time ago. That's when it first entered my life, I don't know. I'd have to say my earliest recollection of anything related to martial arts would be visiting my aunt and uncle that lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, because they had cable, and I saw my first Bruce Lee movie, and so I think that's probably the first thing I can remember about martial arts. And then there was Billy Jack, the old Billy Jack movies. That was kind of my first look at what martial arts were. And then I started, finding things to read about it and stuff. I was very young. Well, not like young like the kids are today. I have kids in the program now that are 4, but I was old enough to start noticing that stuff. And as I kind of grew into the idea that, martial arts were a thing, family life was a little rough, and I felt the need to be able to stand up, for myself and for my family, and thought, based on what I'd seen in the martial arts and in the movies, those heroic figures were standing up for people, and obviously that's what martial arts were for. So that's kind of the impetus to why I got started and what I thought martial arts was for, and I guess still do today,
So at that time in your life, was martial arts something that you were just curious about, or was it something that you felt like you actually needed?
Well, in the beginning, I guess I could say I was just curious, like most kids, but very quickly, I think it turned into something that I needed. And my father was going through tough times and had a lifelong battle with alcoholism, and he was very violent during those times. And you get very good at reading the situation, whether you should avoid him, and if it's going to be violent today, and that sort of stuff, and just that household, and feeling like I needed to be able to stand up for myself, and the domestic violence that goes on there, and I tried, but I was a little kid, and but in my kid's brain, that if I got some training, I'd be able to stop that. And so it's pretty funny. I found an article probably in the back of a comic book or something. I don't remember where it came from, but it was for a mail-in martial arts lesson. And I want to say it was $5 for a booklet. And so I would do stuff to get $5 and mail off for a booklet. And it was like pretty good sized booklet, and black and white photos, and somebody stapled it together and folded it and sent it to me. And the place was in New Jersey, which was like, might as well be another world to me, a small town boy from Arkansas living in the woods. New Jersey, that's crazy. But every lesson you got had it was a multicultural curriculum. So like one booklet you get would be karate, and they'd tell you stand in front of the wall and do your reverse punches up against the wall and try and touch it with your knuckles and do 5 sets of 50 or whatever, and then do snap front kicks in the air and try and keep your hands chambered. And I would do all of that. I would do all of it, and I would do it like for hours. And I even confiscated the chicken coop that I had been raising fighting roosters, and so I cleaned all that out and built it up inside and ran an extension cord so I have light. And I think I had a military duffel bag that I stuffed full of clothes. I tried a tow sack, that's terrible. I found a military duffel bag and hung that up, stuffed it full of clothes, and used my gloves, my dad's work gloves, leather hay hauling gloves, so it wouldn't tear my hands up. And so there I was, just out in the barn, punching and kicking and reading my booklets and doing the stuff in the air. And then the next lesson would be kung fu, and I'd do some kung fu stuff. And then one lesson was like shurikens, and so I went to my grandfather's workshop and got out some junk metal and hacksawed out some throwing stars and ground them on the grinder and sharpened them. And I didn't realize shurikens weren't sharp. I actually put edges on them. And then we threw them into every tree we could and every telephone pole. And we lived out in the country. You couldn't hurt anything. And then we were dodging throwing stars. And I'm throwing them at you and you dodge. You throw them at me and I dodge. And we got in trouble for that. So that was into throwing stars for a while. But that was kind of the beginning of the exploration, and it was that just mail-in catalog. And then a couple of years later, I was probably, I don't know, 10, 11 at that time. A couple of years later, there was a guy who he was actually the PK World Full Contact Kickboxing Champion at the time, and he'd just gone through a divorce. His manager split with a bunch of money, and you know how that garbage goes. And so he needed the money. So he was traveling to our little town to teach a couple times a week, and another little town to teach a couple nights a week. And he was just trying to hop around in between fights and kind of get some stuff going. And so I started training with him. I want to say in probably 83 or 84. And trained with him for as long as he was stable. You know how that goes, professional fighters. And then he left, and then another guy who was the reigning PK world champion. So these all full contact kickboxing guys. The next guy was also the ISKA kickboxing champion. And he taught Taekwondo. And so we just started doing Taekwondo because, so, you warm up, you do some calisthenics, you do some forms, lots of calisthenics, as you might imagine, because they were all trying to be in amazing shape. And then put on these 16-ounce boxing gloves that are still soaking wet from last night's class, wherever that was. And then we would just spar. And so, I mean, the idea of control, full contact champions. Much later that I realized somebody was like, oh, control. You should be able to hit and pull it or not hit as hard as you want. But that was not the case when we first started. It was all, full contact kickboxing. So for a young kid, working with primarily adults, that was a good wake-up call for me.
Tuan, do you remember if there was a moment where, like, you come to the realization of it becoming more than just something you tried, something that it might actually become like lifelong?
Um, I don't know that there's a moment where that was a conscious realization. Um, it was very quickly. I'd tried to play football. My dad had been played football, and I'd heard all the stories, and so I tried football. It just wasn't for me. I tried basketball. Wasn't for me. I fouled out of every game, and that kind of stuff. And uh, um, tried t-ball. None of that. It was all boring to me. I wasn't interested, but I was interested in martial arts. And so once I got into a class, I was like, yeah, this is the business. This is what I'm about right here. And so right off the bat, that was my identity. And it became, I didn't realize that was going to be the way it was, but, um, it took up all my spare time. I was in the yard punching and kicking, and, I was going to class, or I was grabbing training with my best friends to train on, and, all that stuff. So very quickly, it became my outlet for everything else that was going on in my life, because the rest of my life was just horrible. you know, um, Also, not only that, but like I was fighting in school all the time. We moved when I was in fourth grade to a different town. So we moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Complete disruption. Then we moved somewhere else. Um, and I was fighting every single day in school, at the bus stop, or at school. Um, and fourth grade, I had a guy pull a knife on me in school, because we fought every day. And this day, he showed up with a knife in his hand, and it didn't. And fortunately for me, because I was in fourth grade, he would have just killed me. Um, but so it didn't turn into a physical escalation. But I fought all the time, and it was kind of a normal thing.
Yeah.
And so martial arts was just a process of trying to make it through that everyday struggle.
Yeah.
Around that same year, my dad got in a fight, and his best friend broke his jaw. And then they jumped on him, and a couple other guys jumped on him and beat him so bad they started knocking all his teeth out. And then they reached in and were just pulling his teeth out with their fingers. That's how bad they busted him up. And so same time, I'm fighting every day. Kid pulls a knife on me. My dad gets in that fight. Um, that guy goes and does some other heinous stuff and goes to prison for it, much worse than what he did to my dad. So it was just kind of it was in the atmosphere, if you know what I mean, that violence. So that if it wasn't there, it was pending, it was just any moment a spark would kick off, and, who knows where it would go.
How does that upraising affect the way you view the world around you?
I think when you're young, you don't really realize what you're doing, but I spent my whole life trying to prove my dad was wrong, that all these people were wrong about me, that I am, a good man, and that I am going to be worth something, and, all that stuff. And so I was looking for the toughest martial arts, the most deadly martial arts, and so, and I was very fortunate to get to meet guys like my third instructor, Monty Ashley, who was a black belt in several different martial arts systems, who was like, yeah, you should study a lot of things. You should study anything you can get your hands on. And so, I just kind of was always looking for the most realistic, most practical, most effective, all that stuff. Joined the Marines because they were the toughest. Yeah. You know what I mean? We're just trying to prove them all wrong. And of course, later on in life, I realized, oh, that's what I've been doing all this time is, and a ton of young men go through that, right? Trying to prove their father's wrong, or trying to prove that they're worthy, and, all that stuff, and stuff we help people with today. But, that's definitely what I was going through. And as a young man, I was angry at all of that. I was angry, that life was so hard and things were so tough. And so I took it all out in training and training partners, and all that stuff. So anybody who was my age, they just got busted up and went away. The only people that survived it were the adults who were just bigger and stronger and tougher, and many of them more skilled. And so they became the canvas that I was working on to try and improve myself.
Right. So when you look back at yourself at that young age, 10, 11, 12 years old, starting that journey down martial arts, did you have any idea that like the road that you would eventually lead, it would lead to?
No, I couldn't even. I mean, if you would have told me, there's no way I would have believed you. I can barely believe it today. The I didn't know anybody who did martial arts for a living at that age. And then as I did meet the guys, they were rare anomalies. And they were all barely making it, financially. And yeah, and their life was in ruins at the time. I say that they were young men themselves trying to figure it out too. And no, I didn't even realize that this path was possible. I'm not sure it was possible at that time. But as I got the more I pushed, the more doors appeared. And, but to tell me, no, I mean, everybody I grew up with was poor and poorly educated. And, the best you could hope for would be like, maybe you'll get a job in a factory and you'll make a decent wage. They'll give you a decent wage for the next 20 years and you'll be able to save a little bit of money. And, but things like traveling and teaching and, all that stuff. I mean, no. I mean, I was living on my own at 16, in a house with no electricity and no running water. So who thinks that you're ever going to be, I mean, you're just trying to eat some food that day, you're trying to, the feeling of being alone was crushing. And all I had was martial arts. Those people were regularly in my life helping me be better. And, but everybody else was pretty much gone. And, to say that, if you'd have said, here's the plan, I'd have been like, yeah, that's great. Will you buy me a hamburger?
Wow. So at what point would you say martial arts stopped being something you were practicing and started becoming part of your identity as a man?
By high school, I was known as that guy. I did a nunchuck demo at my high school talent contest. I was teaching martial arts in my little town a couple of days a week by then. And I had, guys who were in their 30s, coming to train with a 16-year-old kid. And the other 2 nights a week, I was traveling to my class 30 miles away on my motorcycle. And so I was teaching or training 4 nights a week. And then Friday and Saturday night, I worked in a movie theater as a projectionist. So that was Friday night and Saturday night. And then Sunday, I, slept and then right back to it. And, I'm still going to school, trying to graduate from high school and, do all that stuff. So I didn't have time for anything. I barely dated. I worked at every job. In the summer, I would haul hay, or one summer I got a job on the back of a trash truck and rode on the back of a trash truck and grabbed trash and threw in there. I was just trying to make a living, just trying to find food. And so the only consistent thing there was martial arts. And so it was my identity very early.
For a lot of martial artists, there eventually comes a point where they realize they need deeper instruction, not just techniques, not just mentorship, or not just techniques, but rather mentorship, right? They need a lineage. And for you, that path eventually leads you to Tulsa. And a man that you've talked about many times, Sifu Terry Gibson. How would you say that first connection with Sifu went? And how did that come about?
Yeah, well, in 1988, I attended a Sifu Francis Fong seminar in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And back then, Sifu Fong had disciples, and one of his disciples was a guy named Carl Peck, I believe, and he was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so he's had Sifu Fong in for a seminar, and I'd heard that he was an instructor under Guru Dan, so I'd go to see JKD. And then I get there, I'm like, this is not really JKD as I know. Like, this is not. And of course, then I realized, oh, Sifu Fong is Wing Chun with a JKD filter, if you will, and from Guru Dan. So he'd do a little Thai boxing, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But so you got Sifu Fong, who's just slick, super slick, and he pulls this guy out of the crowd. And this big muscle-bound dude comes walking out and puts his hands up. And, of course, Sifu Fong is just throwing him around and trashing him. And I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. And then I noticed that there was some relationship there between him and Sifu Fong, this big muscled-up guy. So we went to lunch and came back. And I started talking to him. And he said, yeah, I've met Sifu Fong. I know him well. I'm an instructor under Dan Inosanto, and I teach these arts. And that was when I first met Terry Gibson, and I wasn't impressed with Terry at the time because, well, one thing, he was just playing, the fall guy, just playing the uke, and Sifu Fong, of course, is the contrast. It was just world class, right? So, but I was impressed with his credentials, so I got his card and started talking to him. And, I think about it now, and I'm a little embarrassed by it because I would call the guy every other week and talk to him for an hour or two. And he was so patient and so helpful. And I remember I talked to him so long one time. He's like, I got to go teach class, but here's my wife, Kathy. And he put Kathy on the phone, and I talked to her forever. And, I was just literally just trying to anything I could to get to these arts. And they were just very helpful, very supportive, very encouraging, and, just wonderful. And that was the beginning. And so then he was like, hey, you should come up and, attend a seminar and that sort of stuff. And so I went to, and later that year, 88, went to a Dan Inosanto seminar and saw everything I'd been thinking of, right? And I was like, wow, this is world-class martial arts right here. And that was when I really got to see Terry and Kathy perform and do well. And, like, oh, wow, that's okay. That's amazing. And then of course, Guru Dan and Simo Paula. It was the first time I really kind of got to know them. And after that, I was going up once a month and taking private lessons, and I would save up for a month to be able to afford a couple hours worth of lessons at $50 an hour. And then I would drive the 4 hours to take 2 hours worth of private lessons. Then I would stay and he'd let me attend evening classes for free. And I would go bang around with all the other guys that night. And then I would drive 4 hours back. And then I would work for that next month. I would just work on everything that he had worked with me on that private lesson. I was videotaping back then on big VHS tapes. And just work the, dog out of it and then come back and do it again. And so I just did that, for the next couple of years, really, until he gave me the opportunity to come work for him.
Wow. What would you say began to change in your understanding through that exposure once you started training under them?
Yeah. Well, some pretty significant things happened during that time in my life. And when I moved to Tulsa, I got away from a lot of that stuff. And I was surrounded by people who loved martial arts. And I now had a mentor that I got to put hands on a regular basis and put hands on me. And he was the consummate professional. He had been an attorney before then, so he knew how to run a business and knew how to be a professional. Very caring guy, wanted to know everything there was to know about you, and had a great sense of humor. And it was just very nurturing. Hard, taskmaster. He was tough. Not so much on me, but like on everybody really. Um, and they just took me in, and in that time I went from being trying to prove myself, and fighting to do that. Like every sparring session, I was trying to prove my value on earth, right? And whether I deserved my next breath. And that all went away at Gibson's. That all went away. I was training because I loved the people. I loved the martial arts. I was fascinated because now all of a sudden I'm in the middle of, people talk about, training with Guru Dan, about, drinking from a fire hose. Well, moving to Gibson's and doing it 7 days a week was like standing under a waterfall with your mouth open. It wasn't a fire hose, it was a waterfall, because it was never ending. There was no, I would teach 6 days a week and train with the guys 6 days a week. And then if we had seminars, it was 7 days a week. So that'd be time when I'd go months without a day off. So it was just, and he had world-class guys already. I was not the highest ranked. There were guys who had already been training with him for, a couple of decades. So he had really deep talent pool there. And I was just one of those instructors. And so, if you wanted to go box, you went and boxed with Darian, who'd done Golden Gloves boxing. And if you wanted to do C-Lot, you did that with Eric Jensen, because he was one of the best C-Lot guys in the country. And, if you wanted to do stick work and stick and dagger and all that cool stuff, Terry and Kathy were just amazing at it. If you wanted to do some full contact Hubid, Sifu Gibson was amazing at it. So there was just like so many great people and such a great think tank. And I didn't feel like I was having to train for anything other than that I loved it. And so is that time really transformed my whole perspective of training, what training was for, what the training should look like. I had a good class structure from my previous instructor. Showed I actually had a very good class structure, very militaristic and structured. But when I got with Terry, he taught more tribal based, if you will. So it's hugs, handshakes and hugs, and ask you about your kids and your wife and how's the job going and how's that shoulder, and all the things, much more personable. Would stay after and talk, and if you missed class, he would call you and check on you, that kind of thing. So it was a completely different view of things, of martial arts and what martial arts could be.
How much of an impact do you think that relationship had on the way you view how to run an academy today?
Oh, it's there's no doubt. I when I moved to Wichita Falls to open, what would become Warriors Way, my goal was to just replicate Gibson's martial arts after Terry's passing. It was just I'm just going to do the same thing, right? Kathy had an envelope system, and so she would put money in this envelope and save it, and put money in that envelope and save it. And I just came here and wrote that same thing, wrote the same stuff on envelopes. This is how we do this, is how we do that. And I had the same script for phone calls when people would call, and all the stuff that I had learned to do at Gibson's, I was just going to replicate that here. And so it was the launching platform for me. If I hadn't had that tutelage on not just how to be a better instructor, and how to teach people with a sense of caring, and make teaching about them and not me, and of course being with them and learning at least a small area about how businesses work. There's no way I would have ever made it on my own. That was the launching platform for everything we do now. And of course, now 26 years later, the systems are so much better now. We're much more evolved, but that's definitely how it started. So without them, first off, I wouldn't know any of these instructors. I wouldn't have gotten certified from under them. I wouldn't have learned the systems and had the education or the experiences, made the friendships. None of this would happen. I don't know where Harley Elmore would be without Terry and Kathy Gibson giving me a shot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to take a second and talk about one of our partners, GripKeeper. So their line of products are great for building out your dry fire practice program. Their trainers match the vast majority of existing setups and let you work real reps, draw, grip, trigger control at speed, etc., all in the comfort of your own training space. The team and I think it's a great supplemental tool for incorporating in your dry practice and just increasing the overall volume of reps that you can get. So definitely check them out. Go to gripkeeper.com, and if you make a purchase, take advantage of our partnership code, AHT10, to save a little coin on making your purchase. As always, we're grateful for your guys' willingness to support the companies that support us. Thanks. Through that exposure, obviously, you develop greater exposure to Guru Dan. Do you remember when the first time was that you trained with Guru Dan?
I do. Guru Dan is one of those guys. I had read his books. I had read the articles that he'd written in Black Belt magazine. And of course, I'd seen him in Bruce Lee's movie. And so watching him in real life, meeting him in real life, was, a life-changing experience. When I saw the skill level that he exhibited, and the depth of knowledge that he had and the breadth of knowledge that he had, and how effortless things looked when he performed them, I was like, man, it's almost like magic. And back then, he taught fast. It's not like now. Now people complain he's teach fast, but I remember him teaching 17 disarms off an angle 1 and saying, okay, you got 3 minutes to work on it, go. And I was like, yep. Finally, we're getting somewhere, because I know all 17 of those. I'm going to be all right, But that was a couple of years into it, right? So of teaching, he was just seeing him the first time, and I remember he'd go, everybody got it, and I'd be like, nope, I don't have it, because how everybody's quiet, they don't say anything. I was not that guy. I'd be like, nope, I didn't see that. And he'd go, I remember very particular. He goes, what was it you didn't see? I'm like, the part where you stabbed her and you had the knife in your hand, and then she has the knife in her hand somehow and she stabs you back. I didn't see that part. So, I was just completely honest. And, I'm not known for having, talking around the problem very much. So, and so I found that first day very frustrating. My partner gave up by hour 2. And was like, here, look, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to throw the stick at you. You do whatever you need to do. If you learn it, then you can help me when we get back home. And so I was like trying to remember material as much as possible. But it was a mind-blowing thing. But I very vividly, I have very vivid mental pictures of Guru Dan from that session, from that day.
Is that what really started the peak interest in FMA, Filipino martial arts?
Well, Guru Dan wrote a book called Filipino Martial Arts back in the mid 80s, early 80s, 84, 85. And I had read that book, and I'd read the chapters in the back, right, about John Lacoste and Andrew Cabalas and the guys, right, the masters, the legends. And I was fascinated by the stories of them and the stories of training with them, of him training with them. And that I found more fascinating than the technical aspects of the art, because it's a picture book, here's the 1, here's the 2. So I couldn't really put it together. In fact, I remember trying to learn the blocks I would get in the pose like a wing. I would get in the pose that Guru Dan was in, and I'd be like, okay, ready, go, hit me. And the guy would just crush me with an angle 1. And of course, I'm being static. So it's just smash my arms. And, I was like, this is not working. This is terrible. I am missing something that's critical to this. And of course, it was the motion. It was the motion that comes with that. And then all of a sudden, the things like, oh, this is an elliptical block that leads into a strike. All that stuff made sense once I saw it in real time. But until then, trying to picture it in a book was brutal. So I already was aware of Guru Dan and tracking all that. And that's what made me interested in Filipino martial arts. Of course, I was still a huge Bruce Lee fan. But Filipino martial arts was definitely on my radar. It's just got so much depth, and there's so much character in the people and the stories. that really began to captivate me.
Yeah. So, what would you say? Uh, at what point would you say like Filipino martial arts specifically, became like a major part of your path?
Well, I had studied under Monty Ashley, and he did um, for what later kind of became known as original Jeet Kune Do. And so it wasn't the same exact curriculum, but I understood trapping and kickboxing and the Jun Fon methods of those things. And I had trained that with him. So when I got with Terry and Kathy, and subsequently Guru Dan, I was like, oh, I'm kind of familiar with this. And so I excelled at that pretty quickly, um, because that's kind of how I already fought. And but Filipino martial arts under Terry and Kathy was a big part of our curriculum. And so we did lots of stick fighting, and back then we had the Dose Pares masks and some hockey gloves, and that was it, just so we were fighting, full contact with what we would refer to now as kind of minimal gear. Um, but and I was like, yeah, this is what I'm looking for. Not a martial art where you do forms with your weapon, but you actually fight with it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And I still did all the other things, but I'd say that probably by 92, 93, it was pretty solid that I was a Filipino martial artist. Like, I still did everything else. I still did Muay Thai with Ajahn Chai, and did JKD and did the whole curriculum, and at that time, that was around the same time that Guru Dan formalized his own system of Mafalindo Silat, and got, everybody got certified, or in our academy, when you got certified as a full instructor under Guru Dan, he would then full instructor under him, you would get recommended to Guru Dan as an apprentice. And so I still keep that same structure in my organization. But so you got certified in Filipino martial arts and JKD, and that was the magic right there, man. That's I'd say by then it was very clear that I was going to be a Filipino martial artist.
Yeah. So when you look back at those years, looking back on it now, what would you say those years built in you?
There's a lot of things. I would say that one of the things that I first started seeing when I was working for Mr. Gibson is I started looking past the drill. And so I was like, how does this drill connect to those things? And what's the progression of that? And so I started learning from Sifu Gibson, but also asking Guru Dan questions, because now I had him, like, I guess as unlimited as you could have him. And so I could just ask him questions. And then, he has all those notebooks, and I was pouring through his notebooks and trying to get what I would refer to now as a system structure, like the progression, the how does the system work? And so very early in that time frame, I remember, like, okay, I know this drill. Where does this fit in? Or I know this technique. How does it fit into that drill? So that's, I'd say, one of the things that was really key for me in the early 90s was, I remember, like, going, whoa, there's a system behind this. It's not just an accumulation of a bunch of different techniques and a bunch of different drills. There's a method behind this where they all come together and move you forward. And so that was really, really big for me. And then I'd say realizing that you need as many different training partners as you can. And I don't mean students, I mean training partners. And of course, many of them are students, but and then realizing each one's good for something different, right? So you rarely have one guy that you can do everything with. You have this guy who's good to work with this, and you have this guy who's good to work with that, and you have this guy who's good to work with this, and I had such a great. I want to say Gibson's probably had 150, 160 active students at the time. Every one of them an adult, no kids, and so there wasn't a shortage. And at one time we had 26 or 27 instructors certified under Guru Dan in our academy. From everybody from Terry and Kathy, who were full instructors, all the way down to the lowest apprentice. And so, but they were all instructors under Guru Dan. They were all really very skilled and knowledgeable. And so I had guys who were very athletic, guys who were bigger than me, smaller than me, faster than me, more skilled than me. And so I just kind of, whatever you were good at, that's what I was working on. And I would train with everybody and try and, so I think that was a really good thing for me to realize. And then I started taking talented young students in from class, because those guys weren't enough. I would take those talented young students in class and say, hey, you want to come in an hour early? Hey, you want to stay an hour late? Hey, what are you doing this Sunday afternoon? That kind of stuff. And yeah, it was a great time, but it was all I did.
Yeah.
People were like, yeah, how was it? Are you a big Seinfeld fan? I'm like, nope. In the 90s, all I did was train. And they're like, oh, what'd you think about this? No, you don't understand. All I did was train. I missed a decade, right? All I did was train. And they're like, oh, yeah. Well, what'd you do for a hobby? I traveled to see Guru Dan. What'd you do for work? I trained with Guru Dan. Like it was it all the time. It was all I did. All I did.
What would you say made these mentors of yours solid mentors beyond just the technical component of how they were teaching you martial arts, but more so like from a mentorship component of, what attributes did it build in you as a man?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the first couple of instructors were about, being tough and being in good shape and, all that stuff. Then I got with Monty, and he was, Short Ashley, and he was about, real fighting for the street and being well-rounded and being very skilled. And then when I got with Terry, he took this backwoods kid from the mountains of Arkansas and said, look, kid, there's more to the world. Let me show you around. And him and Kathy would, help me with things, help me understand things that I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't grow up in a family where people talked about saving money or, responsibilities or any of that. So I literally had no clue about how to live your life and how to be a professional. And, as silly as it seems, like, hey, you need to do your laundry and wear clean uniforms every class. Yeah. Nobody had taught me that. And, when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, because when I was a teenager, I was drawing water from a well and then using that to scrub clothes in a sink and hanging them up to dry in the house by the wood burning stove so that I could go to school. So, I mean, like, I was just making stuff up and trying to figure things out. And so when I got to Terry and Kathy, I wasn't really any better. And so they were really good at helping me see a bigger world and realizing that, there's a professional element to this, right? You need to be a professional. You need to look professional, speak professionally. You need to be on time. You need to do the right things. And, teaching martial arts is about how to make them better, not about you. Class is fun and everything, but your job is to make them better and to help them achieve their goals. And those were all pivotal things that were all brand new to me. Shouldn't have been, but just because that way I was raised, they were. And they were patient enough to help me through those things.
Yeah. So clearly there's a profound influence in your development from this lineage. And it's like, I guess I'm asking, how does losing a mentor like that change the trajectory of one's life potentially? After Sifu Gibson's passing, your journey took a very different turn. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah. Well, obviously I still had a relationship with Guru, and but it's not the same relationship that I had with Terry, and I had a relationship with Paul Herman and Master Chai and all those guys, and but not the same. And so after he passed away, I thought, I just watched the man I thought the most of in the world, fight the fight of his life and still lose. And, I moved into the house with Terry and Kathy, and the last few months of his life and took care of him every day, and gave him medicine and made his lunch and bathed him and sang to him and read the Bible to him, and ultimately baptized him. Um, so when we lost that fight, really took the wind out of my sails, and I was completely lost. And everywhere I looked, it was painful memories, And I had a lot of brothers there who were also going through it, but I just wasn't ready to. I just couldn't be there with them, And so I felt like I was alone again, and so I thought, well, I'm done, and so I gave away my gear and all that stuff, and thought I'm not gonna do anything. I'm not gonna do martial arts anymore, because what's the point? This was the guy who had everything. He had the rank, the knowledge, the skill, the relationships, the school, everything. And so I was like just really crushed by it. So I moved to Florida and spent some time with my pastor, got my head on straight, just a few months. And then my friend said, hey, I want you to come back to Wichita. Come to Wichita Falls, small town. I think you'll like it. So I still wasn't quite back in the game. I had been teaching a little bit down in Florida, because my friend was down there and was teaching him and his kids and stuff, and my pastor. And I moved here, and I needed a job, so I started bouncing as a bouncer, and turned out that was a great outlet for a lot of anger I was going through. And so as a bouncer, I got to rep stuff. Yeah. And so had tons and tons of volunteers that would say, hey, come up to me and say, hey, I would like a lesson tonight, free private lesson tonight in front of my friends. Would you please demonstrate some stuff on me? And of course, that's not how they worded it. They were screaming and yelling cuss words in my face, but all I heard was, hey, I want a free private lesson. And so I went through that phase where I was just angry, and I was taking it out on them and anybody I could. As a bouncer, I found other bouncers and started training with them. And I met this cute little girl there that I thought, oh, she's pretty cute. And I think I like hanging out with her. And so I started, dating this girl and training with these guys, and then fighting on the weekends, and just kind of biding my time, really. And so I did that for a while, and it wasn't my best self, I'll say that. I'm still a good guy. Still wasn't crushing people who didn't need to be crushed, but I was definitely there if that's how you wanted to go. So, and then my dad had moved on and had a second family, and had my next little brother Jeff and our little sister Ashley. And so I got a call one night at the club where I was working, and I forget who it was, but one of my family members, and said my sister, who had cystic fibrosis, was in the hospital and was not going to make it, that I should come home to see her. And so I turned to Crystal and said, hey, my sister's passing away. You want to go with me to Arkansas and do this thing? And so we went up there, and just in time to say goodbye to her, and she passed away. She was 10. And so we're there waiting for the next couple of days before we have the funeral. And, I'm just thinking to myself, she's only 10 years old, and that's all she's going to get. And I'm 30. I've already had 20 years more than she'll ever get. And would the world be a better place if Ashley had had these 20 years that I've already had? And so it made me, this is all during the self-reflection of her passing, waiting for the funeral. And so I thought, you really need to get back into martial arts. That's what you're here for. That's what you're best at. You need to stop playing around, flirting with girls and fighting guys. You need to be a contributing member of society again and get back to your real purpose here. And so I kind of came to that realization during that time. And we had the funeral, and we were driving back somewhere in Oklahoma. And I turned to Crystal and I said, "Hey, you want to open a martial arts school?" And she said, yeah, let's. I've always wanted to open my own business. Let's try. Let's do it." And then she started asking me questions. What would that look like? What would that take? And so, somewhere I drew it out on the napkin, the traditional napkin, blueprint. And so we did that on the way back, and we came back, and that was kind of the beginning of it all. So it wasn't just the passing of Terry, because that could have derailed me it did derail me for a couple of years. And but it was the passing of my sister that gave me the wake up call. Hey, get off your butt and get back to what you're supposed to be doing. And so that was a gift from Ashley that I try not to squander. And now I try and remember every day that I have here is a day she didn't get, to enjoy. She didn't get to do anything with. So I'm trying to make sure that my time here is valuable. You know,
for sure. What would you say?
Yeah.
That taught you about strength, like going through that point in life, going through the losses of these loved ones. What did that teach you about strength in that time?
Yeah, I'd say that. Well, first off, I have to say that during the time when I was living on my own and this enormous sense of loneliness as a young teenager, I was fortunate enough that my training partner was my pastor. So, and he basically bullied me into going to church camp one summer. And I was like, "Hey, I need the summer to make money, right? Like I got to haul hay. I got to do something because this is my only chance to work full-time hours between school." And he's like, "Listen, just go." And so I went to church camp, and got saved, right there. And so, so I would say that faith and that presence was always there when no one else was. So when I felt alone, I would just talk to the Lord, and no matter how hard things were, I would just constantly talk to the Lord, and in the tough times when things were brutally difficult, and losing close friends, losing family members, all that stuff, that's always been there. That feeling of that I'm not really alone. So I would say that when it comes to the idea of being tough, because I'm not really, right? I just don't, in the sense that like I can't prevent those things from affecting me. But what I can do is make sure that I'm managing that well enough to still be productive and still move forward. And because every one of those things hurt me just like they hurt everybody else. But I didn't let that knock me off my wagon, so to speak, and derail me. In fact, as you can hear, most of the time, it reminded me of who I'm supposed to be. It grounded me in the behaviors that I was supposed to have to move forward. So the harder it was, just like training, the harder it was, the more I buckled down. And then, of course, when I was here, when my sister passed away, I wasn't alone for the first time. Really, I wasn't alone in that sense. In that I had my wife. Crystal was there for me during that time, and has been ever since then. So that's when I realized the value of a massive force multiplier like choosing the right partner.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I would say that those were tough lessons, but they just drove me to buckle down and be more what I was supposed to be.
Can we go more into the relationship with Mrs. Elmore, Salah Crystal? Can we talk about how has she helped balance components of you that weren't necessarily developed based on your exposure thus far?
Well, I don't think I've ever met anyone with a better smile, right? So, um, the when I met her, I was still reeling and angry. I was angry at Terry for passing away. I was angry at me for not being able to save him. I was angry at the Lord for taking him. I mean, I was angry, and and it went right back to the same feelings and behavioral patterns, leaning towards violence and leaning on violence, to help cope with those things. And so, Crystal, made me laugh every day. And when I saw her, her smile and her laugh, was something infectious, and I found myself drawn to that. And I still am today. She still does today. Every day she makes me laugh. Every time I see her and I see her smile, it does something for me. And and I had a sense of connection that I really, I mean, obviously, had relationships before, and they were all unique. But with Crystal, she brought something, a love and caring that I had not felt ever. And so she really kind of helped me manage that monster, if you will, and realize that I didn't really need him every day, and then eventually get a little more grounded. And she's also the one who's very much, and if anybody who knows us everybody knows, oh yeah, Crystal's the one running the show, I'm the figurehead in that I do, 10% of the work and get 100% of the accolades. She does 90% of the work and gets nothing, and so she's the one, figuring out how to pay bills and how to do this and how to do that and what we're going to do. And she's the one when I go, yeah, we finally made it. She's like, no, we still have things we can do. We still have, levels of success we haven't achieved yet. And she has never let me rest on anything, not on our success, not on my skill, nothing. She's always motivated, not like, cracking the whip, but motivating me and inspiring me to want to be more, to want to be better, to want to be more capable, to be more successful. And I've never had that in my life. So, yeah, without her, there would be no Warriors Way, and I would be a completely different human. I'd probably still be a little angry and significantly more violent.
Has she helped change, right? Like coming from that experience and then meeting Mrs. Elmore, has she helped change or evolve your understanding of strength?
Yes. Yeah, I'd say that I aspire to be stronger for her. It's not like, I mean, she is an incredibly strong woman and very driven and very focused, and while at the same time being very loving and very caring. She's got the most empathetic heart I've ever met. She's just insanely caring about people. Not something that's really comes naturally to me, but she's driven me to want to be stronger and be more capable. And together we're, I'm good to go on my own. I'm strong. I'm capable. She's the same. When we're together, we're unstoppable. And so that's been a unique thing for me. I talk about it as if I'm still surprised by it, but it's been 27 years now. And I guess I am still surprised by how powerful that is to have her in my life, and for us to be working together as a team is pretty crazy. Changed my whole life.
It's remarkable. I love seeing it. I'm inspired by it, just getting to see kind of the behind the scenes on what that looks like from our relationship. It's always inspiring as a husband to see how that works. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you guys,
I had a younger,
as you were,
I had a younger SIOC instructor. I mean, he said, I got to ask you some questions. I'm like, sure. So he gets up gets his notebook out and pen and chair and literally sits right in front of me and goes, okay, how are you so productive? You do this and this and this and this and this, and you're constantly getting stuff done. How are you so productive? I just died laughing. And I'm like, listen, marry the right woman. That's it. That's it. You marry the right, get the right person on your team, and there's no limit, man. There's no limit. And that was the end of that little interview. He got his chair and walked
That's a
off.
life lesson right there. So as you
Yeah.
continue building the academy, obviously you have Mrs. Elmore now. You guys are building this machine in the organization. It seems like you were still searching for more mentorship, deeper mentorship. And through our discussions, you've expressed how that eventually led to the blade system that has become one of the most, if not inarguably, the most respected in the world, which is Sayakali. How did
Yes.
Sayakali first come onto the radar for you?
Well, Guru Dan, I was still training with Guru Dan and all that stuff. Around that same time, Paul Herman passed away. And so I found myself with the feeling of I need more mentors. I'm still only 30, 31 years old. I need more mentors. I need to keep growing and that sort of thing. And so I was training with Guru in Dallas, and he was doing knife stuff. And he and I had done some knife work privately, and so he had shown me some things. I'm like, wow, that was amazing. And so he's teaching this public seminar, and I said, hey, can we work on some of that stuff that you and I worked on and that you showed me? And he was like, Harley, I don't really like to show that stuff publicly, and this and that. And he said, listen, if you really want the knife stuff, you should study with a guy named Chris Sayok. And I was like, who's that guy? And he said, here, and he gets out and gives me his phone number and says, give him a call. And I said, so what is it like? And he goes, well, they only do knife work. And I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. And he said, on a scale from 1 to 10, I would say they're a 10. And I was like, holy cow, that's the highest recommendation that you can get on the planet when Guru Dan says that your system is a 10. And I said, what would you say our system is? He said, 7, maybe an 8. I was like, what? We have the best knife system on the planet. And he's like, no, theirs is better. They have, and I'm like, how could it possibly be better? And he said, well, they're specialists. They just simply do things that they go in deeper, and they understand things and do things better. You should just call him and go train with him. And I'm like, I'm just floored that he said that. And so that Monday, I called Pamana Tuan, Chris Ayok, and I tell him who I am and give him my number. And he says, okay, I'll call you back. And that was it. And I thought, wow, that was weird. So I find out later that he called Guru Dan to vet me. And Guru Dan said, yeah, I think he'd be good for your system, and think you'd be good for him. And so he called me back and said, okay, when do you want me to come down? And we'll come down and do a seminar for you, and we'll get started. And I was like, whoa. I mean, my wife and I are living in our storeroom of our martial arts school. We can't afford to eat out. We can't afford an apartment. We're living off of a hot plate and a microwave, living in the stock room of our martial arts school. We can't afford a seminar. And he said, it's okay. I'll just, I'll take whatever you make at the door. And if I lose money, I lose money. It's no big deal. I'd be a good way to get started for us to meet you and for you to start your training. So I was like, okay. And so we scheduled a date, and he came down, and I was just blown away. I had never seen anyone exhibit that level of skill. Never. And to this date, still haven't. I mean, just, I can't even put it into words. But he would do stuff to me, and I would do everything I could not to let him cut me or stab me or disarm me or whatever he was trying to do. I would literally do everything that I could to not let him. And he would crack jokes, juggle knives, holster, resheath, draw my blade, use it, stab me, reholster my knife and redraw his, and all while the crowd's laughing and I am sweating. I am working so hard trying not to let him do that. And I was like, my God, that is amazing. And so I was like, yep, this is it. and then later that night, Crystal and I were talking, and she's like, I'm not really. They make me feel uncomfortable, and I'm like, yep, me too, because they were not like Guru Dan. They're a completely different kind of martial art, and different kind of people, and so Guru Dan doesn't want to teach the knife work because, it's very violent and ugly and all that stuff, and the Syaks do not shy away from that at all. And so it was a little intimidating at first, but the skill levels he exhibited just blew me away. And I was like, whatever it takes to get that, I will do it. This is it. This is what I've been looking for. I knew right then. And that first weekend we had conversations where he was very open with me and very candid about his personal life. Sitting in my stock room in my love seat, we're just me and him talking, and he's very open about his own life and martial arts and all that stuff. And we just built a relationship right then. And that just kept growing. And I realized right then that was what I had been looking for. And he was what I had been looking for.
Yeah. So many people that have trained in SOC, especially when we hear it from the earlier years under Pamanatuan, many describe it as being extremely demanding, both mentally and physically. What did you experience specifically when you first began training in that environment?
I would say that if the Harley Elmore who had trained, if he'd caught me during my Gibson era, my Gibson phase,
Mm-hmm.
if I had met him then, I would not have trained with him. But after 2 or 3 years of bouncing and hundreds of fights against people trying to really kill me or hurt me, I was more primed for the reality that SIOC presented. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It was one of those things where I was like, yeah, okay, I get that. I've had a taste of that reality right there. I understand that. I also agree with that. And so everything that they said and did just kind of clicked into my personal experiences of real world violence. And I was like, yeah, that's right. But they understood it and had it in a name or had a phrase that was so clearly covered that topic that I was just barely comprehending of violence. They had a depth to it and a structure to it and a systematic approach and a logical approach. And then on top of that, there was something inside the system from one person to another that I was drawn to that I couldn't quite get my finger on. But there was a level of accountability and professionalism and brotherhood that I really was like, yeah, there's something there. And all centered around Pamanatuan. But every one of them, all the senior instructors had it. So, I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was like, there's something here that I'm not quite aware of yet, but there's something to this. And I got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of pushback from guys who were training with me at the time. A lot of them left me. A lot of my students, instructors underneath me, a lot of them left me because they're like, nah, we're not doing that. We're not going to study under this fat Tuan, or we're not going to study under this guy or that. We don't need somebody else. We got Guru Dan. And, a lot of the JKD mentality of, well, let's just get some of the knife drills and that's all we really need. We don't need to be in somebody else's curriculum and all that stuff. But I realized that there was something in that progression, something in those training methodologies that I had never seen anywhere else. The only time I'd ever seen or even glimpsed the idea of what Tuan Sak was actually doing with guys every week was in the legendary stories of Guru Dan's instructors. Kind of went back to that old school idea of how hard that training was, how brutal that training was, how dangerous that training was. Tuan Sak was still doing it. He was still doing all of that. And so I was drawn to that because I believed in the results of that, right? And I remember Guru Dan telling me the story about driving from LA to Stockton. And as he got closer and closer to Stockton, he'd be so nervous that his palms would sweat. and the sweat from his palms would run down the steering wheel and drip off onto his lap. That's how nervous he was. That's how scared he was, because he knew that when he trained with these Monongs in the park, that they were going to use live blades, right? And that they were in the drills, they were going to slap him with the flat of the live blade or hit him with the back of the live bayonets. That's what they were using back then. And I recognized that Guru Dan was never going to do that with me, you know. But that's what made him so good. Yeah. And I'm a firm believer that if you want to be as good as your mentors, you got to do what they did. Otherwise, you're going to suffer a generational deficit. You can't. There's no way I can be as good if I don't do the same things. And so, Tuan Sayak was doing stuff that was like that, and it was hard, and it was demanding, and still is. I mean, you know, it's one of those systems where you don't have to do that. You don't have to put that pressure on yourself. You don't have to do the hard things. People self-select out of training all the time. But if you were willing to do it, he was willing to go there with you. And that was something I greatly admired. If you're willing to do what it takes to get good, we'll be willing to go there with you and help you along the way. And I saw him do that to all of us, not just me, all of us. But yeah, training was brutal. And in the right settings and the right instructors and the right thing, it still is.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily every class and every public event. You obviously don't do any of that in your public events, but training in your own groups and stuff is not any different now than it was when Pramana Tuan was alive, at least not to my knowledge. And not, I certainly teach it exactly how I was raised. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing everything with my students that Pramana Tuan did with me, and holding them the same standards and performance, and hopefully I'm accomplishing the same goals, and that they'll be even better than me someday.
So, I mean, at this point that you're jumping into Sayak, you've got decades of martial arts training already, right? You've already got decades of training in FMA, Filipino martial arts, full contact fighting, working at the bars.
Yeah.
I mean, what specifically about Sayak Kali challenged you in a way that maybe other systems didn't?
Man, I would say that it was all of the things that I had done in all the other martial arts, the things that you think are hard. I remember thinking that Muay Thai was hard because it was physically exhausting. Like, that's why Muay Thai is hard. And you get hit a lot. You're getting punched and clinched and kicked and well, just add a knife to that.
Yeah.
And I remember Silat being hard because you're getting thrown all the time and twisted and torqued, and power would crank on you and then get you in an armbar and throw down, and then you'd be on the ground thinking, oh my God, he's going to break my arm. And then he would fall over on it, and as he's falling, I'm thinking, that's it, he's going to land on it, it's going to break. And he would land, and it would just be more painful. Well, now just add a knife to that, and trying to learn material and perform it in real time under those kind of pressures, and now just add a knife to that. And then everything you did was being evaluated.
Yeah.
Every technique you performed, everything you said, everything you did, how you trained, how you acted with your seniors, how you acted with your peers, how you acted with your juniors, how you composed yourself during training, before, during, after, how you ran your life, how you talked to your wife. All of that was constantly being evaluated, and still is. And I'm not beyond that now, and no one in the system is. So, there's. When I try to explain to people what makes it different, there's so many things that they're almost not the same animal. Does that make sense?
It does.
When people watch it, they go, yeah, that's Filipino martial arts, that's martial arts. They recognize that. But there's so much more to it than, a drill or a technique. And when I eventually just got frustrated with people like, well, isn't it, what's the difference between it and Inasano Kali? And eventually I'd just be like, none. There's no difference. Just, same disarms, same tapping, it's just, Same, man. You're good. Just keep training with Guru Dan. You don't even come over. But for the people who did, life changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So over the years, you continued traveling, training with the two Hans within SIOC. What kept pulling you deeper into that system?
Um, Pamana Tuan say, I'd be like, hey, when can I come up? And he'd go, hey, come up next week. Spend the whole week with me. You can sleep on the couch. And I'm like, okay. And so, my school's not making any money at the time. We're still living in our school. And I'm scraping enough money to buy a round trip ticket to Philly and back. And they would pick me up at the airport. I would sleep on the couch. They would feed me when they fed their little kids. They would feed me too. And we would train from 7:30 in the morning. The wake up, the alarm would be, he'd push play on the record or CD or whatever it was, In the Jungle. The song?
Oh yeah.
And so In the Jungle, full blast, everybody in the house woke up at 7:30. And you started training probably by 8. And you would train for a couple hours, then we'd have a little breakfast, and then you'd train a few more hours, and we'd have lunch, train a few more hours, we'd have dinner, you train a few more hours, then you'd have a snack, you'd train a few more hours, and now it's 3:30 in the morning. And that was Monday. And I would go sleep until 7:30 the next morning when the thing would play, and I'd get up. It was his reveille. And I would do that for a week, and I would just get, I would like to say I was crushing people, but in the beginning, I was just getting crushed. Guys would show up at lunch, beat my ass for an hour, and then go back to work. I'm like, man, and then, you think, okay, it's almost 10 o'clock at night. Everybody's kind of winding down. We just had a little snack, and then Tuan Tom would show up and you'd train for another 5 hours, and, he'd leave at 3 in the morning and you'd go, jump in the shower and crash on the floor and do it again. And I would do that over and over and over. And so it was his openness. I remember Guru Dan, I was talking to him and he said, Harley, there's lots of Filipino martial artists, lots of instructors out there. You can train with more than just one. And I'm like, I understand, but they're not calling me saying, hey, you want to come sleep on my couch for a week for free? And I'm like, how can I turn that down? This openness, this willingness to give.
Yeah.
And all I got to do is show up and accept it, And so I did. And, no joke, I would show up and just have, a few dollars to make it through the week on. And they knew that. So they'd make a big pot of something and we'd eat that. They weren't, super wealthy, but they would feed me this out of the same pot that they would feed their little kids. Little kids were little back then. The furniture had foam taped on all the corners so little kids wouldn't run their heads into them. That's how little they were. They're still that little, but it's because they're short. That was a long time ago. But him opening those doors, the training was what it was. There was massive levels of growth. The first time I remember he was here for a seminar, and I trained with my guys getting ready for the seminar. And so I had a bunch of peers from Terry Gibson's era, right? A whole bunch of those other instructors that were still floating around. Good friends of mine and all that stuff. And so we were all training. We're all pretty good. We were all pretty closely matched and everything. And then I got a private lesson with Pramana Tuan in a hotel. That's kind of how he gave it to you. I just gave it to you in a hotel. And so he whooped me from one side of that hotel to the other for a few hours. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was kind of a thing. All the high ranks in SIOC have what's called a hotel tape. And it's where you got welcomed. And some guys had already got their hotel tape when they were already good. I was just brand new. And so we got tuned up for a few hours. And the next day when we started training, it was like all my peers had never even seen martial arts before. All of a sudden I could do whatever I wanted to them and they couldn't stop it. And everything they did, I shut down with ease. And it was the very next day. And I was like shocked, and they're all shocked. And I'm talking to my buddy Eric, and I'm like, whoa. And he's like, man, what is going on? I'm like, I don't know. And he just had a way of making you that much better, that much faster. And then I did it again and did it again and did it again, did it again. And so I just went skyrocketed in skill level. And of course, and with that comes an understanding, a technical understanding. I'm a bit of I've been in martial arts long enough to be a bit of a, I don't know. I question everything. I'm like, that's never going to work. And Tuan would laugh and go, you're right. And then we go do it. Next thing you know, I'm doing it to someone. He'd be laughing at me because I just did it to someone. And they were doing everything they could not to let it happen. And I did it anyway. And yeah, there's a level of understanding that comes with that depth of training, that intensity of training, and the willingness to do that, that can really make you great super fast. And he had the formula for being able to do that.
Yeah. If for those listening that have experience, right, in training with a blade or in a blade system, how would you say, or what would you say is maybe the one thing, if possible, that separates Sayak Kali from other blade systems that people typically encounter?
That's a good question. I would say that reality is something that is there whether you believe it or not. And it's unchangeable. And I would say that is one of the things that is immediate when it comes to Sayak. If I cut you, you can say whatever you want. I still cut you. And if you tried to cut me and you couldn't do it, you can say whatever you want. You still didn't do it. And that sense of reality, there are no excuses. There's no, we don't pretend to cut each other. I would come back with bruises, purple bruises that big that were knots underneath from getting stabbed so hard with aluminum trainers. There's something about the reality that they're willing to strive for that most other martial artists are not. I would say that's probably the greatest thing that separates them from almost anybody, any system I've ever met, is a very real, practical sense of what you can and can't do, what can and cannot be done. And it comes with accepting a level of personal responsibility that pushes the boundaries of safety, because a lot of us got hurt to varying degrees. But if you're willing to take those risks, and if you're willing, well, you're not really risking, you're mitigating risks as you go. But if you're willing to do that hard stuff and face those hard things about yourself and about your training, and do what it takes, it really will make you amazing,
Absolutely. As the years go on, you don't just remain a student within the SIOC system. You eventually become a leader. Eventually, you become a Tuhan within the organization. And that journey ultimately led to something very few martial artists will ever achieve, specifically as a SIOC Tuhan. Can we talk about your involvement with Sayak Kali and how it deepened, eventually getting you to the point where you're in greater leadership roles?
Can you be more specific about which leadership roles you're talking about? Are you talking about in the organization, about Warriors Way?
As a Tuhan. Like, what does it mean as far as becoming a Tuhan? What does that look like from a leadership perspective?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, it's in the system, and I don't want to push out a bunch of stuff that's kind of
course.
It's really tribe only kind of stuff, and there are no secrets to it really, in the sense that it's not like secret knowledge, but it is specific to us. And so but every rank has a specific job, right? So students have a job, class assistants have a job, um, you know, apprentices have a job, associates have jobs, full instructors have jobs, and 2-ons have jobs. And with those jobs come responsibilities, and they're pretty clearly laid out and defined for you. Now they weren't when I was coming up. It was really kind of formulating at that time. When I started, there was only one 2-on. That was 2-on SIOC. And then a couple of years into it, then 2-on RAF gets promoted, 2-on Tom gets promoted, and continues on from there. There was only 3 ranks under. There was full instructors, which would have been 2-on Tom and 2-on RAF, and others, 2-on Rick, and Colin and Mendez and Conroy and those guys. So there was a crew with generations before me, but the rank went full instructor, and then there were 3 levels of associate, and that was it. And so this rank structure was much different than it is now. So a lot of that got fleshed out, and as it got fleshed out, roles and responsibilities got assigned to those things over time. And so I had walked through all of those, on every single rank structure that we had, right? So at one point we had a position who's the pivot point between the council of 2-ons and full instructors and all the other students in the body. That was one person. That was me at one point. And so it's just roles you had to fill, dockets you had to, if you wanted to work your way up. And so by the time I got the 2-on, 2-on, when I was talking to 2-on right after he promoted me, I said, well, what was the difference? What's the difference between now and yesterday, right? What's the difference between now and a year ago? And he said, well, it's very, very easy. He said, first you become a 2-on, then you get promoted to 1. And, what he was saying is, in essence, is that, you become a leader, you lead, you are helping to run the organization, you're helping guide the next generations, you're helping develop projects and support the whole tribe and the whole group and every member and all that stuff, that it takes to be a leader and a 2-on. And when we see you fulfilling all those obligations, then we acknowledge that with a promotion. But that's kind of how it works in psychology. It's definitely deeds driven. You can hang out and watch and be my friend, but that won't get you promoted. You actually got to do the jobs, So you can't pay enough money to get promoted. You can't just hang out long enough to get promoted. You can't even know enough to be promoted. You have to do all of those things, manifest themselves in some sort of work. And of course, the first work we expect from anyone is get good, get skilled, get knowledgeable, get capable, be of value to the tribe. And then when you're good enough at that, you kind of look around and you go, oh, these guys are also here with me. They also need help. Let me help them. And so you start helping them, and then everybody's working together towards things. And that's just the process, I think, that Pomona 2-on fostered to help everybody and the organization. So by the time he passed away, everybody was in the position they were supposed to be in already. So when he stepped over, nothing changed at all. Unfortunately, I see organizations where the head instructor passes away and the system disseminates, falls apart. As much as I love Mr. Gibson, that's really what happened there. Everybody, all of us, as much as we loved each other and him, we all just kind of drifted apart, except for a few of us, and the organization fell apart. Well, Pomona 2-on knew that was how it worked, and so he built that system so everybody was already in place. So by the time he was gone, literally nothing changed about my life or my world or my responsibilities inside the tribe, and that works its way all the way down.
Yeah. So part of that work, part of that progression, the journey, so to say, within SIOC also included work connected to STG, or SIOC Tactical Group. Training individuals whose work carries real world consequences. Can you speak to how that environment shaped the way you approached martial arts training thereafter?
Yeah. that's a big subject. So, um, first off, I never expected to be there,
Mm.
with those level of operators, didn't even realize that was possible. Um, I knew that this level of operator existed in in theory and idea. So you hear about things, but to be there training with them was a different thing altogether. And I will say that Pomona Tuon guided everything. It was spearheaded by Tuon Tom Kyer and supported by the rest of the tribe. And so I was fortunate to be able to be there on the very first contract and the subsequent contracts for the next 25 years. Um, Tuan Raff was there, and Tuan Carl, and Tuan Bong, and I mean, all the guys, all the senior instructors, the gurus, the Tuans, we're all there, and I was just lucky enough to be squeeze in and be there for it, and then to be there consistently because my job here at the school, I made time to make that happen. So as other people got pulled into other projects and stuff, I was able to be consistent and consistently be there to work with Tuan Tom and do that sort of stuff. So um, there's so many things that it changed about me and about my training and understanding of martial arts and my personal skill sets and things like that. But what I would say right off the bat is the realization of consequences that these people are counting on what I'm going to show them. They're counting on not only knowing it, but being able to perform it as soon as possible, as fast as possible. And their lives are counting on it, and the lives of their teammates are counting on it. And it's that's no small responsibility. And not to overstate it, but the success of a mission literally might not just lives, but the success of an actual mission might hinge on something. And so that weight was not lost on us in SIAC Tactical. And so that was one thing that I still carry. In fact, I had to come back and relax that just a bit because civilians are not ready for that level of intensity. Another thing is that you have to do it in a short period of time. You don't have 20 years to turn these people into Tuons, right? You have a short period of time. You got a week here, 2 weeks there, a week there, 2 weeks there, a weekend, here, that kind of thing. And so you're talking about trying to push people to levels of performance that are Olympic level athletes, world-class, guys at providing violence, and you're trying to up their game with what you're doing. And so, and it's operational in value. It's not like they're trying to master martial arts for personal mastery's sake, or they're trying to, you know what I mean? Like they want this for operational capability. And so, you're talking about a fully integrated system with something that they're already world class at, and they want to roll that in. And when they get to this point where you showed them something, it has to be just as good as what they did to get there. And then they go right back into whatever it was before. So that level of standard performance and passing information. It's not just about how good. In fact, it doesn't matter really at all how good I am. I mean, that's not true. I guess we did have to perform on them and with them so that they bought into it, And so they go, yeah, that's valid. And be like, let me see that again. Can you do that on Bob? And can you do that on John there? And then John would grab you and slam you up against the wall, and you'd be like, okay, here we go. And you would do it, and they were like, yeah, all right. And then they would go train, But you had, there's all that testing that goes on in the beginning of getting to know each other and respect each other a little bit. And it was phenomenal, man. It's some of my favorite training moments of my entire life were during those training sessions, quite literally best job I ever had. And and it was, there's stuff that I can't even talk about, obviously, um, but getting thrown downstairs or fighting as you tumble downstairs and you're trying to stab them, they're trying to shoot you, and you're trying to fight them in the car and fight them out of the car, and you get smashed down, and somebody's trying to drive off in the car, and you're trying not to get your legs run over, so there's again an insistence on reality because of the consequences of the training, of lack of training or of successful training. And so SIOC, of course, excels in that. And so then I come back home and I'm trying to, so I do that on a contract, and I come back home and I got to teach a 5-year-old, no, shake my hand with this hand. Now look, put your feet together, look me in the eye, and shake my hand like this. I'm trying to teach a 5-year-old how to shake hands and say, yes, sir. And then go back to that, and then come back to this, and trying to help some mom who's afraid of getting punched, and so it was the dichotomy of training both civilians in some side and then those guys on the other really was pretty exciting, and challenging, obviously, very challenging. But anyway,
Yeah,
I don't know if I answered your question. I think I'm rambling a little bit.
No, it's great. I think it's good to see the balance between the two, right? Like you're still running a martial arts studio where you're teaching 5-year-olds, right? Something as simple as looking at an adult and making eye contact, all the way through training, tier 1 operators. And obviously there comes a learning point where you're learning to balance these two things, learning how to ramp up the dial there versus using a switch all the time on off. It's like, nope, there's modulation. I have to have a systematic regression. So I think that's all huge in relation to the understanding of what we're talking about long form here, or long term, with the end goal of developing mastery and what that looks like. It just speaks to your experience in that regard. When you're saying this, I'm thinking about like when someone like you, right? When a student reaches the levels that you've been able to accomplish, what qualities would you say are mentors really looking for beyond just mere technical skill?
Well, I'd say that probably everyone is looking for people of good character. I think that every system, nobody wants to hand their system or their art or their school or even their class over to someone who doesn't have exemplary character. You're looking for great character. And, as gatekeepers, we know we're handing this on. It's only ours for a moment, and then we hand it on, and who we choose to hand it on to is really super important. Because if I can have a really incredibly technically skilled guy who's never going to do anything with it at all. He's never going to help anyone. He's not going to have any contribution to the art, the organization, so you're looking for the right character, I guess is the right word.
Yeah.
The right character. And those characters, a big part of that character you're looking for is not just being a good guy, but having a sense of responsibility to the 10,000 hands that came before them, to make sure that, we're honoring the people that came before us, not like superficially, like bowing to a photo or stuff like that. Although those are all certainly useful forms of remembering the 10,000 hands, but honoring them in the sense that you're living the life that is worthy of what they invested in you. It's not ever too far outside my consciousness that I need to be worthy of all the time and energy that Terry and Kathy and Guru Dan and Ajahn Chai and Herman Sawanda and Tony Samara and Pamana Tuan and Grandmaster Attilio and Tom Kyer and Raphael Kayanan, all those guys invested, their time. They left their families and spent time with me and focused on me. And they didn't do that because I was paying them money. In fact, most of the time I was not doing that. They did it for something else. They did it because they felt like investing in me would be beneficial to the organization, beneficial to the tribe, beneficial to the members of the tribe, in the long run, that I was worth investing in. And so I am consciously aware of that, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do now. It's exactly what I'm looking for in my students, is making sure that they all work and think in that same process, right? They realize that they have to be good, they have to be useful, they have to be beneficial, but then they also need to help make everyone else around them that way. That's the only way we have any longevity as an organization, any real cohesiveness and effectiveness as an organization in the current time, but certainly moving forward, right? One of the things I talk about all the time is martial arts has to transcend time and space. So it has to work 100 years ago in the Philippines, and it has to work right now in Texas, and right now in Yemen, and right now in England, and right now in Africa, and right now in California. But it also has to work for our students in the future. And if we drop the ball either in laziness or ineptitude or ignorance or lack of skill or lack of effort or lack of love or whatever those things are, if we drop it now, then the next generation misses out on that, and we have in essence either diluted or completely killed the system. So that's a job. And I tell my instructors when they're getting ready to test for instructorship, I'm like, look, being an instructor is a job. And if you don't want it, don't take the interview. Don't take the test.
Yeah.
It doesn't end when you get your instructorship. You now earn the title of instructor. Now you have to spend the rest of your life instructing.
Yeah. So you mentioned 10,000 hands. For those that are listening that are not familiar with that terminology, can you expound on that?
Yeah. So in SIOC, Tuan SIOC had a saying, Pamalan Tuan SIOC had a saying, when you draw your blade, 10,000 hands draw it with you. And of course, that's a pretty self-evident, like most of the things in the system is self-evident. And so, you're not alone. People invested in you. People invested in the material that they developed. People invested in the time it took to pass it on and perfect it and develop training methodologies and things like that, and test it and all that stuff, and then gave it to you and invested in you. And now you have to do the same thing. And so I am just one of the 10,000 hands that my students are fortunate enough to receive the efforts of the whole tribe. And that's why every generation should be better, because it's another 10,000 hands worth of evolution, of development, of processing, of understanding. As long as we don't stray too far from the reality of what we're doing, as long as reality is continually injected into what we're doing, meaning that the training that we're doing now has contextual relevance to the people that we're handing it to. And as long as we do that, then we're on the right track. So nothing happens by itself. Otherwise, SIOC Kali would have been a flash in the pan. It would have been the brilliance of one guy named Chris SIOC, and everybody would have been like, "Yep, he was amazing, the most skilled guy I've ever met." It's a shame he passed away so early, and then that would be it.
Right.
That would be it. It would just be a flash, like Bruce Lee. It would just be gone. And but instead, 10,000 hands are carrying that on. Along with the 10,000 hands that came before him. So it's something we keep on and that we're constantly aware of. And so everything I do now is the result of that. So in my 10,000 hands, my father, who taught me to be independent and free thinking and self-sustaining, and also my martial arts instructors, my grandfather, all the people who've helped me along the way, my pastor, all the people who've invested in me to help me be who I am. Those are all part of my 10,000 hands, not just that one system. It's everybody who's invested in me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's important just for those listening that aren't familiar with the terminology, realizing the amount of responsibility and honor that goes with that phrase when it's used within our circles, within the tribe. Even now you're hearing outside of it being used. I think it's important that everyone has an understanding of where that comes from.
Right. Yeah. Or they'll just put 10,000 hashtag 10,000 hands and not mention SIAC at all. But, and you think about it, it's not when you're about to, eat or something trivial. When you draw your blade, which means in the most dangerous times of your life, in the most critical moments of your life, 10,000 people are there behind you.
Mm.
Right. So when you are counting on this the most, you're not alone. 10,000 hands are drawing it with you. And that's very powerful,
It's
So when any time in your life where it is absolutely critical, and this is one of the most pivotal moments of your life, you're not alone. 10,000 hands are drawing it with you.
very deep. Tuan, from people on the outside, right? From the outside, people often they tend to see titles like that, titles that you hold, and assume that they represent an arrival point. But the deeper you go into the subject and understanding of mastery, the more we realize, as you kind of noted, that responsibility comes directly with it. In relation to that, you've spent nearly 4 decades pursuing mastery in martial arts specifically. Looking back now, what does that path cost you?
Well, first it costs you all the lives you would have lived, right? Now, I don't think
All the lives
they
you would
would
have lived.
have been as fruitful. Yeah. The Harley that would have gone to college, that didn't happen. The Harley that would have done this or done that or married that girl or taken that job, all the lives that I would have lived. But I don't see that as a drawback because I have zero regrets. If you're happy with who you are and happy with the life you live now, you can't look back on anything in your life and feel bad about it or wish it hadn't happened, because all the hard things we talked earlier about in the beginning of this interview all helped shape me so that I was ready to do the things that I needed to do in life. And so, I'm extremely happy with who I am, the life I live, the impact that I get to have in the world, and with people and the people I get to do it with. So I don't wish that anything had changed, good or bad. But I will say that along the way, there have been a lot of casualties on the side. Personal relationships with girls, relationships with families, those things, because of my sense of purpose, that I really felt like this was my way out of the poverty and the lack of education and lack of opportunity that I experienced earlier in my life. I really felt like this was my way of crawling out of that quicksand. And so because of that, I didn't realize as I was going that I could have maintained some of those relationships, but it doesn't come for free. You sacrifice a lot. You sacrifice relationships, as I said. You sacrifice other opportunities. Until my school started, becoming financially successful, my whole life I was dirt broke. I couldn't afford, rub 2 pennies together. I was flat broke. And as someone with no education and no work experience often is.
Yeah.
But martial arts, for everything that I paid to get here, it gave it back to me in spades. It's 100-fold. And it's not hard to look back, because people say, well, can you imagine what you'd be like if you hadn't done martial arts? And I'm like, I don't have to look. I can just go back home. I can just go back home and look at the people that I went to school with, hung out with, and all that stuff. And I got a very real sense of what I would be and what my life would have been like. And so as hard as it has been, the sacrifices we have made, my wife and I over the last 26 years, myself over the last 40, and the sacrifices that my instructors made with me, and for me, and their families made with me and for me, letting me crash on their couch and giving me their time. That's time I took away from their family, from their dad, that they'll never get back. So it wasn't just me. Lots of people invested and sacrificed and gave up stuff. But now on the reward, I think that's a necessary element of achieving some success in life, becoming a good person, having success. And by success, I don't just mean financial success, because that's only one tiny little measurement of success. It just happens to be the one most people in society are measuring by. But being successful does not come without those sacrifices. But I would do them all again, and I would encourage everyone else to do them as well. There are times when I listen to guys like, oh, you know the deal. Oh man, there's no Sayat Kali in my town. Like, guess what? There was no Sayat Kali in my town either. In fact, there was only Sayat Kali in Philadelphia. So I saved up my money, and I flew to Philly, and I slept on the floor, and I came back, and I worked my guts out, and I did whatever I had to do. Demeaning, humiliating stuff like throwing birthday parties and cutting the cake with a samurai sword so that I could make an extra $50 so that I could go back to Philly. I didn't want to do that. I did that because that's what it took to be successful. And of course, that's just a silly example, but I certainly did plenty of things. When I first moved to Wichita Falls, I got 3 jobs. I was a bouncer. I worked in a grocery store selling meat. And then after I would do that early in the day, then I would go bounce at night. And then after I got done bouncing, I would go to a local car dealership, and I would sweep the floors, mop the floors, take out the trash, clean the windows, all before the salesman got there. Then I would go home and sleep. And so I had 3 jobs. So I was working about 60 hours a week trying to make ends meet. And that's what I was doing before I started Warrior's Way. When I started Warrior's Way, it didn't get easier. I just wasn't doing it in 3 different jobs. I was doing it all in one. But all those sacrifices were by far worth it. And I could name names, and any one of the people, any one of my students that I have trained over the years, I could name any one of their names, and it would make all the sacrifices I've done my entire life worth it.
Mm. Yeah. It's the reason I asked the question is when we talk about mastery, there's an allure to the title master, right? Or having developed mastery in any aspect of life. And I feel like very few accomplish it, and very few accomplish it because they fail to realize the process that inevitably comes behind it, right? They're so focused on the outcome of developing, the title master, or having developed mastery in a specific, capacity in life, and failing to realize that the process is a huge lift, an undertaking, that it comes with sacrifice. It goes amiss. So I just wanted to get your take on, what that looks like as somebody who's lived it.
Yeah, I would say probably the single biggest thing is all the other things that everybody else did, like watch a favorite TV show, go camping on the weekends, hang out with their buddies and watch the football game and drink some beer, all the things that everyone else did. I never did any of that. I was my whole life specifically geared towards training martial arts and understanding martial arts better. Every day I get up and spend the first couple of hours focusing on martial arts curriculum development. Every day. Mm. It does not end. I have been a martial artist, and that has been all I've ever done. And it is all I've ever focused on. So I don't play video games. I think they're a stupid waste of time. Every hobby that I do, like shooting, is directly related to martial arts, right? So literally everything I do comes back to the focal point of martial arts. And so I just don't have anything else. I never have had anything else. People are like, oh, you go skiing? I'm like, nope. They're like, oh, I don't mean water skiing. I mean mountain skiing or snow skiing. Nope. Neither one of those. Never done either one of those. For one, they're for rich. Those are hobbies for rich people. I've never been rich. And two, why would I do that? Because I should probably be training.
Yeah.
You know, you want to watch a football game? Nope, I'm training. So I'd say that's probably the thing, is the consistent focus of one particular direction in life and not letting anything else pull you away or off that path. And so people who go to martial arts class a couple of times a week, I don't even know what to say to that. I have literally never been that guy. I have literally never been the guy who just went to class a couple times a week and I came to class on Tuesday. I didn't think about it again until I came back Thursday night. That has never been me. I have always been almost single-mindedly focused on martial arts training, martial arts study, martial arts research, martial arts history, martial arts strategy, like everything you can think of when it comes to martial arts. I've spent 4 decades working on that. And so I'd say that's the thing people don't want to do. They don't want to give up all the other things in their life to do that. But it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody. I think that the title, I mean, first off, there's only SIOC 2 on, so I don't really think much of any other. Like, you can go do you, great. People trying to convince me that some other martial art or some other thing is with the way I should go. I'm like, they're basically trying to convince me that their version of what they got off the salad bar is better than what I got. I'm like, who cares? I'm glad you like carrots on your salad. Good for you. I'm not remotely interested. You're not swaying me. You're not changing my mind. This is who I am. This is what I do. And I'm glad what you're doing works for you. But I really think that most people are not willing to do what it takes. And when I found SIOC, I found a group of people who were willing to do that, who were just like me. And that was huge power assist right there, is meeting people who were just like me. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with Two on Tom, and it's 4:30 in the morning, and we got to be somewhere at 7:30 in the morning. And we're still standing there. We're still, it started, we're getting up we got off the couch at 3. We're going to work our way to prospective rooms to sleep. And here it is, 4:30, an hour and a half later, we're standing in the kitchen talking about, more stuff. And then we meet at 7:30, and then we talk about it for 30 minutes in the parking lot. Then we go inside and we talk about it for an hour there. And then we come back to the truck and we talk about it 30 minutes there. Then we go to work. We talk about it all day and we train it and do it and practice it and work it. And then we get off work and we go right back to it. So literally it's like a single-minded, purposeful direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's an obsession, a healthy obsession that needs to be obtained and understood at the onset.
Yeah. I don't know that it has to be. First off, not everybody has to be that way. That's, again, back to that point, right? Not everybody has to be like this. But if you are, come join us. But if you just want to do martial arts, by all means, you just want to be the guy who goes to Tuesdays and Thursdays and has a good time and goes home, and that's great. And if you want to study SIOC Kali and you want to have other interests and stuff, they're great. There's a role for that too. But that's not what gets you to where I wanted to be, right? And all the Two-ons are like that. We're all very much driven to that level of understanding and purpose. And you can't just do it. You have to constantly be analyzing what you're doing, what kind of results you're getting from what you're doing, realigning to your focus over the direction you want to be going, developing training methodologies to help you get there. And that is a constant process. And if you ever stop that, you're stuck in time and the system starts to die right there. Right. So you have to continually be analyzing and studying yourself, your system, your students, the world around you, the threats that they're facing, all that stuff. That's a never-ending process. You can never be done with that.
All right, so I want to touch on something briefly that comes up a lot these days, and that is the subject of nicotine. There's a growing body of research around nicotine and its cognitive effects, specifically its ability to increase focus, alertness, and reaction time in the short term. We've personally found benefit in using it responsibly in the right context. So for myself and the rest of the team at AHT, if we're going to use something, we just want it to be clean, consistent, and controlled. And for us, that's where Zimo comes in. So if you are already in that lane, kind of already tracking on this, or at least considering it, you can support those who support us by going to zimopouches.com and check out what they have to offer. If you decide you want to make a purchase, feel free to use our partnership code at the checkout. Partnership code is AHT20. That's AHT20, and it'll save you 20% on checkout. So we appreciate you guys. Thanks. So if we look back on all that we've discussed so far, what we see is the journey to your developing mastery in martial arts. For those listening, how does the path that you've walked in developing mastery in this specific domain of life, if you will, how does it translate, right, as far as the process that you've learned to develop the title of mastery, right? Like, how does that process translate over to the other important components of a man's life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you really are embodying that level of mastery, it does it without effort, because it changes who you are, how you think, how you respond to the external stimulus of the world, how you perceive the world, perceive yourself. All those things get changed in a process that takes decades. And it's not a single snapshot, there you are kind of thing. It's a long, hard fought process. And along the way it happens, you have little lessons that you go, that's very similar to something we were just talking about in training a couple of weeks ago, but here it is in this other part of my life. And so ideally, by the time you reach any real level of competence, it is transcending just martial arts, and you're starting to apply it in other parts of your world. Now, I wish I could say that was easy and happened all the time, but it's not. As evidenced by the fact that we have guys who are have a skill competence, a competence and skill, but they're slap around their wives, or they're getting drunk and getting fighting in the streets and the bars, and they're bankrupt, even though they won millions in fights. And you look at their life and you go, oh, well, none of that transferred over, right? So they got the skill here, but they didn't take the lessons that they learned and apply it to the rest of the world. And so I don't think it happens accidentally. And we can all pick any number of professional fighters or professional athletes, for that matter, who make millions and become celebrated, with every accolade that you could, throw at them, and yet they're just dirtbags, and their life falls apart because they can't maintain it, because they didn't do any of the things that we talked about. They didn't learn to adapt those things, and so I don't think it can be accidental. I think it needs to be a concerted effort to not just master a martial art, but along the way master yourself, because you're the only constant in every circumstance in your world. So when you have a health issue, when you have a death in the family, when you have a business crisis, when you have whatever it is, those are just problems to be solved, just like somebody trying to stab me in the neck. And I will address those in the same manner that I address someone trying to stab me in the neck. And how do I know they work? Because those are the same formulas that I use, the same methodology that I learned to develop answers for somebody stabbing me in the neck, and then build a training program for that, and then implement that to where I reach a high degree of efficacy. And now I know that process works. And so when it happens over here, I can just take that and apply it over here. I can trust it because it's already been proven physically. Now I just need to put that over here. And Sayat Kali is one of the few systems in the world that has that all defined, like has that all written down, like every tool can lay it out for you. I think other systems have a tendency for it to be haphazard. And I think some people will accidentally get some lessons here and apply it here. But to say that just because someone reaches a certain level of martial mastery, that's not, we could just say, well, if we took martial arts and expanded it to include boxing, I mean, Mike Tyson's possibly the greatest martial artist of my lifetime, right? And so, but look at what he did with his life. Forever he was blowing up his own life. Only after he retired did he start trying to understand the rest of his world and try and figure out how to solve that by the lessons he'd already learned. But, and we could just name any host of UFC champions or fighters or what, like I said, sports athletes or whatever. So I think personal mastery, isn't accidental for the most part. I think it's got to be a conscious effort to use whatever your personal developmental skill is, and then take that and apply that in a way where it can be used in the rest of your world. If not, then it only works when the system is only of benefit when you're in a violent encounter. And for most people, that's rare, if ever. And so you'll train your whole entire life and never have any real return on that investment. But if, on the other hand, you take the lessons you're learning in martial arts and you learn to apply them so that you can be a better husband, a better coworker, a better son, a better father, a better business owner, then the investment you're putting in your martial arts training pays off every day for the rest of your life. Mm. And that's the value behind, in my opinion, it's the value behind martial arts training, where you are systematically working on a method of personal mastery that's proven first, grounded in reality, proven, consistent, and then hopefully directed. Someone will direct you through that process.
Yeah, I love it. After spending a lifetime pursuing mastery, something important and interesting happens. The lessons that the training space helps facilitate, they don't just stay within the training space, as you're starting to note. They begin shaping how you lead, how you teach, right? How you live as a man. They really shape how we approach everything in life. With that, when did you first begin to realize that the pursuit of mastery wasn't just about martial arts, like you were saying, but more so about how we live as men?
I hate to keep going back to SIOC, but again, you have to have a vehicle, right? Someone has to spend time sitting down with you and talking to you about, hey, what were you thinking there when you did that? What were you thinking when you said that? What do you think he was thinking when he said that? What do you think he was thinking when he did that? And so SIOC has a systematic approach called logical order of thought, or LOT. And it's something that we teach to all of our instructors. And once you get to a certain rank, and it's not something that you get a certificate of completion. It's just our thought process model of how we see ourselves in the world, and a curriculum to help people through exactly what we're talking about. And many people will go through it, but they won't apply it in their world. They don't see the benefit. They don't see the probability of it working. They don't see a pathway to doing it. People are not always ready, and so they don't always do it, right? But it really is a phenomenal progression. And so I would say, when did that happen, where I realized that this could be about more than just personal skill, was with Pamanatuan sitting at his table and looking at him and realizing that this guy had no fear. He was entirely himself all of the time. He had no shame, loving his little girls, in front of you. Like I remember watching him thinking, man, what an amazing father. What an amazing, loving father. And I remember watching him with Selak tests and going, man, what an amazing husband. Um, and you know, uh, I showed up at his house one day and he had purple hair. And I was like, what? What is that? Big, Tuan was blessed with a big head of hair. And I'm like, what's that about? He's like, well, girls. He had teenage girls. They're like, well, they wanted to know if they could dye their hair purple, but to dye it purple, you got to bleach it white. And Filipinos have dark black hair. They're like, we don't even know if it'll stay. So he said, do mine. And if it works, then you can do yours. So they bleached his hair solid white. So one time I saw him, he had solid white hair. Next time I saw him, it was bright purple. And no shame, like did not care at all what anybody thought. And because he did that because he loved his girls, and he proved, yep, you can do this with Filipino hair. Go ahead. And so the girls, dyed a purple streak through their hair or whatever. And but that level of freedom to not care what other people thought, that level of freedom to be entirely yourself without any false bravado or ego or fear of what other people may say or think about you, was such a great example for me to realize this is about that. This is about being entirely who I want to be, being myself without any concern at all about the rest of the world, about other people's thoughts or ideas, and to be the best version of myself without those limitations. And so watching that as every time I saw him, and watching him be that for his students, he was extremely caring and open and honest with me. And I had a great relationship with him. And I miss him literally every single day. And think about him literally every day. But he also had that same relationship or a similar relationship to every other Tuhan. And so when you have examples like that, someone living that freely in front of you, you realize, there's a value to that at the end of the road, right? You don't have to worry about a title being and having to act a certain way in front of people and putting yourself out. Oh, I'm a Tuhan, or I'm a this, or I'm a that, or I do this, or whatever. You don't have to. There's none of that. Like I literally don't have any of that. Now sometimes people take that as arrogance, but it's not arrogance. It's just confidence. I'm confident in who I am. That's it. And I think that is a great way to live. And I did not get that before Pamana Tuhan.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Tuhan, when you use the word mastery today, what does that word actually mean to you?
Yeah. So let me start by saying that mastery is not a level where, okay, I got that. Because if that were the case, I'd be terribly disappointed. I would be bored. I am constantly studying and refining and trying to increase my skill, right? I don't know if you just saw the video of me shooting the bill drill that I just posted on social media. And I threw that up there even though it wasn't perfect, right? I missed a shot. In that 6-shot string, I missed a shot. And I put it up anyway because I want people to see that this isn't about an end stage. It's about a process, right? And so I think mastery is not an end stage. It's a process. And as Tuan Raf is always yelling at, or not yelling, that's not something Tuan Raf does. As Tuan Raf is something is always presenting to people, is that you have to fall in love with the process, right? Because if you're only trying to achieve a rank or a position or a job promotion or a date or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, once you get that, you will lose your drive, lose your will. What happens when you've done all the things, checked all the boxes? So you have to instead fall in love with the process that lasts the rest of your life. And so when I think of mastery, it's a it's a struggle, because a process is a struggle. It's not something that is easy. It is constant research and study and testing and evaluation. And to say that you've mastered anything, I would say if you can master anything, skill sets would be the easiest, right? So I think mastering my one shot from the holster, that's an easy thing to do. These days, if you have a one shot from the holster from concealment that is over 1 second, then you're just lazy. You know what I mean? Like, that is a doable thing. Everybody should be able to do that. Everybody should have a draw from concealment and hit the target in less than 1 second from concealment. If not, it's just because you haven't focused on that. That's an easy physical skill. To master the process is a lifetime, right? And I think that's where real mastery is. Real mastery is building a life or a lifestyle that is where the process is embedded in your life, embedded in your lifestyle. It's embedded in your persona. It's embedded in who you are. This process of seeking, studying, training, analyzing, developing, testing, all that in every aspect of your life, whether it's your business, your relationship, your martial arts training, your relationships with others. I think that really is the value of mastery. That's what you're trying to master, is that. Skill sets. I mean, I remember having jump spinning heel kicks that would crush people, right? 16 years old, first time I ever sent a full grown man to the hospital with a jump spinning back kick to the face. So I don't have that skill anymore, right? I mastered it then, used it very effectively, but that techniques are very low level thinking. That stuff is very basic, very easy to manage. Anybody with any athleticism and a little bit of work ethic can accomplish those simple things, but they won't. If they don't have that in the rest of their life, if they don't develop a persona that is about that process, those things will come and go. You'll make some money and then you'll lose it and you won't know how to gain it back. You'll have partial success. You'll be successful at work and you'll have a terrible marriage. You'll have a great marriage and you'll be dirt broke. You'll have, these professional accolades and your kids won't talk to you and your wife is cheating on you. I mean, this process of personal mastery has to have a scope that encompasses literally everything you do, from how you walk to how you talk.
Yeah. How do you counsel young men on finding the balance on what they need to master, so to say, the areas of life that they need to master as young men?
Right. Well, I will say, I wasn't great at that in the beginning because I wasn't there myself, right? So, but now, the old graybeard, I'm a little bit more, a little further down the road. So it is a little easier for me to kind of see a larger picture. And be able to direct some of the young men. And some of the people that I have in my organization now, not just in SIOC, but in Warriors Way, certainly there's a crossover, and they're both groups of young men and women are the best I've ever worked with. I mean, their skill level, their competence, their capabilities, their martial prowess is all world class. And then on top of that, they're wonderful humans. Like they really are great people, you know. And I've got a generation here that have been training with me for anywhere from 10 to 15 years. I have students here. They have students been training with me since Gibson's. This is back in the early 90s, right? And students that started with me 26 years ago when we opened Warriors Way, still training with me now. But there's this one generation that's been with me about 10 to 15 years that grew up with me, that are now married, have jobs, and have young kids. And you know them all. You've all punched them in the face, and they've all tried to punch
me
you
in the face.
And but they're an exemplary generation, because now I can see what Pomona Tuan was talking about, and I'm trying to pass those lessons on to them so they can also do that. And I don't believe that I follow the SOC methodology in that you have to have train warriors on the mat, but you train tribe at the table, and so table time. And so you have to have time when there's not the pressure of me pushing you, punching you, stabbing you, and vice versa. But instead, we're sitting down, we're talking about, you know, how your life is going. How's your job going? How's your wife? How's your kids? How you feel about that? What are you doing about that? What's your plan for that? And just getting them moving in that process. And now those guys have been doing that with me for a long time, and it's paying off. They're all very successful professionally. They're all wonderful husbands and great fathers, and they're still on that path. Like, this is now part of their persona, and we do that, as you know, because you've been there many times. We do that. You know, after class, we come once a week. We come in my house and we sit down, and you know, we smoke a scotch. We smoke a scotch. Yeah, we smoke a cigar and drink a scotch, and of course, not everybody does that. Some people, you know, just drink water. But and it's certainly not a drink fest, as you know, because you've been there. But what I would say is it gives people a chance to sit down and take a deep breath and start talking. And so sometimes it's just guys getting stuff off their chest. Sometimes it's very analytical. We're really going in depth on something, but you got to have time where you do that. And sometimes it's very lighthearted. Many times it's very hard, uncomfortable conversations. But I think, and the SIOC methodology proves that that's the way to do that. You have to really invest in people. And it's hard to talk about the fact that their kids got cancer in between tie rounds, right? So you have to have a separate time where you're doing that. And it has to be consistent. If you want consistent results, you have to invest in people consistently. They have to know. I have guys that show up and they've been waiting all week to talk to me about this thing, or to show me this thing, or to ask me about this. And of course, they can text me and all that stuff. They all have access to me, but they know that that's the time set aside every week to go do that. And so I think that's the process of it. What you're going to talk about, I think, depends on how you're going to do that, depends on who you're talking to, and where they're at in their life.
Yeah, I can personally attest to it. I mean, one of the different, components of training with you within that system, within that line of thought and that logic, it's just different, like it's absolutely different from every other system that I've ever trained in, and, having been around martial arts since a young age. There's nothing that comes close in that regard. So I say that just as a testament to having seen it firsthand. For those listening, like, I've literally seen it firsthand. We go beat the brakes off of each other for a couple hours, and then afterward we spend at least another couple of hours, if not double that amount of time, breaking bread and having deep and meaningful conversations, which is really why I wanted to do this, right? Like, I wanted this discussion with you and I to be made, somewhat public for the listeners, because I think they can benefit from these conversations and learn some of the things that I've learned that have been deeply profound and impactful on my life as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a brother, so I attest to that completely. So I don't mean to add to what you're saying, but just more or less to testify to the accuracy of what you're saying.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing that.
And I would Oh, my pleasure. And of course, let me just also say it's always a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us. And training on the floor with us, and then having you in those conversations. You always contribute very effectively to not just the conversations, but to the level of violence on the floor. So it's always great to have you.
It's
Um, but what I want to say is that people hear us talk like that, and they assume that what we're saying is that SIOC is better than all other martial arts, and uh, and I would say that SIOC is probably better than any other martial art that I've ever seen when it comes to that, right? So there's certainly an enormous amount of value in other martial arts. I'm not trying to say that SIOC is the only martial art and you shouldn't waste your time with anything else. It really boils down to what you want to get out of martial arts and what you want, at what level you want to achieve, and what level of success you want to have. And so there's certainly nothing wrong with going to your other martial arts schools. I mean, I still teach other martial arts. I still teach all the stuff. I'm still a full instructor under Guru Dan, right? So I still teach Muay Thai, I teach Inasano Kali, Attilio Balintawak. I still teach all the things in my public class because that's where most people are and what most people want. But some people just have a twist that leads them to a different direction, and for those people, SIOC Kali, I think, is the answer. Yeah.
Agreed. Tuan, you've been walking this road for a long time, over 4 decades. You've gotten much farther along on that journey than most people will ever get. And with that, what principles would you say have proven true to get along that journey, irrespective of the specific discipline?
Yeah. I would say that if you're curious, if you keep an open mind and you're curious about the art, about the culture, on the people, about the sport, about the training methodologies, if you just keep a student mindset, an open-minded student mindset, and you ask lots of questions and you do lots of study to try and figure out the answers and things like that, I think that goes well no matter what the art. I would say that if you can, always study with the highest level people that you can train with. So I have been very lucky in that, well, I say it's luck, but it has been a conscious effort to only study with the best guys in the world. So I have never gotten a black belt under the local guy at the Y or the local guy at the strip mall. I have only been certified and trained with either world champion kickboxers or the highest guys in the world in that art, the highest ranking, highest master, literally the guy who holds the system. And if I could do it, some poor kid with no education from Arkansas, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And so I would say always seek out the very best that you can get to. Even if you don't think you can afford it, even if you don't think there's any way you can do it, if you want it, you will find a way to do it. So don't settle, I guess is what I would say. Don't settle for mediocrity in yourself or in your instructors or your training partners. I would say that you have to realize that your skill, your knowledge, your performance, if you will, your capacity to perform, rests solely on your head, solely on your shoulders. Your instructor doesn't make you better. The system doesn't make you better. You make yourself better. Now, they will help you along the way. That goes back to the one I said before. But really, I can't tell you how many students I have put, a diamond in their hand, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool," and then they just throw it in the floor, throw it on the bag, and walk off it like, I'm like, you don't understand how valuable what I just gave you was. And so if you want to be good, you have to realize no one else can make you good. That's entirely up to you. Now, how good you're going to be is directly relational or proportional to the source material you're getting, so to speak. Because you can waste some time. Let's just agree. You could waste some time
For sure.
training with people. There are people out there you could end up. And I say waste your time, meaning they might not be taking you in the direction you want to go, right? Let's just qualify it with that. So if your goal is realistic, no crap, combative capability, studying Taekwondo at your local Y, probably not the answer. Is that useful for other people? Yes, absolutely. But if your goal is realistic, practical, absolutely, combative application, that's probably not your goal. So, so I would say that those three things are really, no matter what the art, it really boils down to you, because they can't stand there and watch every rep you're going to burn. They can't be there when you are fighting the internal battle of whether you need to get up and go work out on the bag or go do your thing or stretch or whatever it is you need to do. They can't be there to cheer you on every moment of every day. That ultimately ends up being entirely up to you, with settling on what level of capability, what level of competence you're going to achieve. And so I guess owning that is one of the key things.
Yeah. In today's culture, do you think mastery is becoming less common, more rare?
Well, I don't know. I wish I could see what it was like 100 years ago. I would say martial arts wise, anytime you're in a culture where violence is very real and very prevalent, the average level of competency goes through the roof, right? So if we went to Indonesia, people are not doing silat to learn it at a seminar and play silat for fun. They're doing it because Indonesia is an incredibly dangerous place, and if they don't have some real physical competency, they might not make it home. So I think that goes around the world and throughout time. I think that in America, or let's say in most civilized, privileged countries where safety is the norm and is expected, yes, we are definitely not producing the level of competency that I would hope that we would have. But all it takes is to go to some third world country where people, have to fight for their lives on a regular basis, or the potential of it is very real. I think you're going to see a higher level of competency and a greater level of mastery because of this.
What do you think some of the causation of that is? What's the result of that here? What's causing that here in American culture?
Well, I mean, what is it? Heinlein's priorities, right? So when you have shelter pretty much standard, like if you can't afford housing, the government will give it to you, right? When you can get food, and if you can't afford food, we'll give you food. And you don't have to worry about your safety because police officers are going to patrol your neighborhood and keep your area fairly safe. When really the majority of your priorities, the biggest threats to us, shelter, food, and safety, are managed by someone else, you don't have to manage them anymore. Then why? Then why would you struggle for any of those things? And I think that's the problem we have in our society, and why we have that problem societally across the world when it comes to first worlds. Because that's a given that you can lay down. I think as Jordan Peterson said, I'm paraphrasing here, and I'm going to add some of my own, but if you get the privilege of laying down every night and sleeping unmolested for 8 hours every night, what an incredible privilege that is. If you get to eat every day you get to eat, even if it's only once, but you get to eat every day, what an incredible privilege that is. If you don't have to worry about your children when you're not directly watching over them, if they can play in your yard or your backyard or in your house and you don't have to worry about their safety, that's a huge, huge privilege. And our society provides an enormous thing about that. And I think that as people, as humans, we are looking for a fight. It's built into us to struggle for those things. And whenever they're just gifted to us, I think we create struggle. We create strife because we know we need to be fighting for something, but I don't need to fight for shelter or food or safety anymore. So what am I fighting for? Well, I'll just make some stuff up. And so we find people who are just making something up to argue with, or argue about, or to defend. They create some, hill to die on that's just completely fabricated. Because everything else is taken care of for them. And so I think that leads to a degradation society in general, and leads to a mediocrity in our society, or in a society. If you look at some of the guys who have gone to look the greatest generation, right? Who took our engineering machines of America, making cars and things like that, and the men all went and fought in the Great War, and the children walked along the roads. My stepdad told me about during the war, they would walk up, pull their little Red Ryder thing and walk up and down the streets in their town, picking up the peel taps of soda cans and the Coke cans and the bottles and every scrap piece of metal. They'd put it in their thing, and the whole city did that, and all the kids did that, and the train would come up and they would just dump it on there and send it off to melt it down and turn it into planes or tanks and wheels and whatever they needed to do. And the women all worked in factories and built planes. That's the great generation everybody talks about. And so everybody came together. Everybody stepped up and did what they needed to do, even though things were incredibly hard, right? And a lot of people don't have any kind of understanding about history, but you had to turn your lights off at a certain time at night to conserve electricity. You had to have a piece of paper to be able to buy groceries in some places. And that's a whole nation pulling together, even the kids doing their part, right? And then what happened? The war was over. The men did what? They came right back and got jobs, and the women raised children and did the thing and acted like nothing ever happened, and they just went back on. Now, did they do that well? Well, some did, some didn't. But that's a group of people who had hardship and rose to that occasion and excelled at that. And that was so good. They were so good at it that they created an overabundance for the next generation, which was my parents' generation. And so that led to, a different era, right? So that led, of course, to the Vietnam War, which was something completely different. We, as a nation, did not do the things we had done in World War II. We did not do those in Vietnam. And so the results of that affected our whole society, economically, socially, all that stuff. So I say all that to get to the point of, if people's lives are easy, why strive for anything? Why strive for mastery? Why struggle? Why push? They'll fabricate problems rather than address the real ones, right? So I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. Tuan, when someone spends a lifetime pursuing mastery, eventually the focus shifts from what they've achieved to what they pass on. After everything you've experienced on this path, what do you hope ultimately remains?
That's a great question. I was talking to my friend Chim, Master Chim, and we were talking about how nothing's immortal, right? Nothing we create, but we all want it to be. We want everything we create to be immortal. If I start a business, I want it to last forever. I want my children and grandchildren, I want them all to run that. We start a company, we want that to last forever. We build a building, we want it to last forever. And I think there's something about being a little bit on the spiritual side. I think God is a creator, and so there's something, and what he makes is immortal, right? And I think there's something in us that is a piece of that is in us. When I create something, I want it to be immortal. But I have to be honest about that and realize that that's not true, right? As much as I would like for Warrior's Way to be immortal, it will not be. If and while we're on that vein, I would say that probably first and foremost is that everybody says, well, you can't take it with you, right? You can make all the money you want, you can build all the things, have this great empire. We could be Ozymandias, right? And look upon my great deeds and weep, right? So realizing that I can't take it with me, I would like to focus on the only things that I can, and that is I want to bring as many of my friends and family with me to heaven as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So because that's my only act of immortality is that that I could bring my family and friends with me to heaven would be a phenomenal thing. But the secondary mission about what I'm created here, I think that I don't really concern myself with like, will someone remember my name 3 generations from now, which is almost unheard of, right? I mean, how far can you trace your family's, like, name, your father, grandfather, great grandfather? I mean, most people can't go further than 3 generations.
Right.
So, but I'm not too concerned with that. As much as I am with the people who know my name right now and changing their life and affecting a change that is so profound that it changes the direction of their life to be more successful, more productive, more effective. And that's not just in Warrior's Way, but it's inside all the tribe. It's in SIOC, it's in Warrior's Way, it's in my community. If I can help the people right now, then I'll create generational ripples, right? If I make that guy a better man, he'll be a better husband. He'll raise a better kid. That kid will be a better father, better brother, better son. And it just goes on and on. So I think that that really is the only thing I can really strive for. I want the system of SIOC to maintain generational success. I think the system will morph over time as necessary, as the threats to the practitioners change and evolve, and practitioners evolve, and the needs of the students evolve. I think the system will evolve too, because it's set up to do that. It's made to do that. And I want to be a positive version of the 10,000 hands. I want to be one of the, when they look back, they go, yep, you see that callous, scarred hand right there with the crooked fingers? Yeah, that was too on Harley, And so that's, I think about as much as someone could ask, is to bring the people that you love with you to heaven, and to affect the people in your life now in a way that's profound enough to create generational change. Somebody pulled me out of the backwoods of Arkansas, not just one, 10,000 hands, pulled me out of the backwoods of Arkansas with no hope for any future, with no money, dirt broke, barely made it out of high school, had to cheat my way out of high school, no plans for the future, no hope for the future, no nothing. And people invested in me and completely changed my life. They thought they were helping Harley. And that makes sense? They thought, I'm going to help this one guy. I'm going to give him a chance. I'm going to help him out. And in doing so, they've helped tens of thousands of people that I have trained over 40 years. And some of them changed their life and saved their lives. Now, those people who helped me may not have had the foresight to realize that that's what they were doing. I'm just trying to be consciously aware of it now so that I have a more specific and focused effort in what I'm doing with the people. So it's not so haphazard or random. Instead, that is the focus.
Yeah. Along that vein, eventually when the time comes, Lord willing, very far from now, decades upon decades from now, when you stop teaching, how would you hope that your students remember you?
Well, that's a great question. I would hope that they would knew how much I cared about them, and that they would remember that I was always pushing myself as hard as I was pushing them. And if they can do that, I think that's a pretty good success.
That's powerful. Tuan, I appreciate you sharing that perspective. For those who are listening and want to learn more about your work, whether that's training, seminars, blades that you're making, or other projects that you're involved in, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
You can email us. Probably I don't answer emails, and I don't answer phone calls or anything like that, unless you're already in my Rolodex. But you can email us at Crystal, Krystal, at harleyelmore.com. And she manages my empire. She'll take care of everything you're looking for. So if you're looking for seminars, training, knives, any of the things that we do that are in our world, and if you just have a question for me, she'll forward it to me, and I'll try and address that and help you out the best I can. But yeah, Crystal at harleyelmore.com is the easiest way. Of course, I'm on social media, but that's a little hit and miss. But you're welcome to try and reach me at Harley Elmore on Facebook or Instagram. And but there's comments and stuff, and I really try and do what Joe Rogan says. I really try and ignore the comments. Don't read the comments. So if you want to speak to me personally, try and don't make a comment hoping I'll see it. Just send me a DM, and I'll try and reach out to you.
Yeah, we'll include all of that stuff, all of your plugs, to everything that you mentioned within the show notes.
Yeah, and come train with us. Come train with us.
Absolutely.
All the answers are in training.
That's it. Tuan, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and share your perspective with everyone listening today. These conversations act as a constant reminder that mastery isn't something that appears overnight. It's built through years of discipline and sacrifice and commitment to the path that most people simply aren't willing to walk rather. I appreciate you giving us a glimpse into that journey that you've walked thus far and are continuing on. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on the AHT podcast. If you found value in today's conversation, make sure to share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Be inspired, be motivated, but most of all, just be disciplined. Obsess over the process, fall in love with the process, and that's it. See you guys on the next one.